Let's open up the Create Edit view for our tasks and start to build the form that our admins will use. In this lesson, we're simply constructing the HTML, not handling form submissions or working with the posted data. We'll take care of that in the next lesson. To start off, we first want to associate our view with the right model. Remember, we can do this by declaring it at the top of the view. So if we just move up to the first line, we can use the @model keyword and then write out cipher mvc.models.task after it. And with that in place, we'll have strongly typed access to the properties of this model. The only catch is that we first have to close and reopen our view. MVC won't detect the change to our declared model unless we do this. First, let's just delete this entire form element. So I'll highlight everything inside of that tag and then just clear it out. And one major difference between Web Forms and MVC is that in Web Forms you almost never work with or create form tags directly. This is because the framework sort of wraps your entire page in a server-enabled form tag and uses that to handle all kinds of tasks behind the scenes. Razor offers a nice HTML helper for building forms, but a nice trick is to wrap the helper inside of a using block, which will handle creating the closing tag for you. So I'll just type @using, and inside that let's write html.beginForm, and then we need to pass in the name of the action method we want this form to submit to, which is createEdit, as well as the controller, which is task. After that, just stub out the end of the using, and our form elements will go inside here. Each form section was also wrapped inside of a div, so let's add that back in quick, and I'll just type out div class equals form group, and close that out as well. Let's start in order and just recreate the title field that admins will fill out. We want to recreate the label element and the text box itself, and Razor has a helper for both. So first I'll type out @html.label4 and then access our title property, and then we can just pass in the text that we want to display in the label, which is just title in this case, so the same name as the property. After that's in place, below it we can create the text box itself. So I'll type out @html.textbox4 and again access the title property. Now if we kind of arrow through the overloads for this helper, we can see that it accepts an object called HTML attributes. This object can be used to declare and assign all of the HTML attributes we want on this element. So we can create a new object inline here and assign our CSS classes through it. I'll just type new and then @class equals form control, and make sure to prefix class with an @ sign since it's a reserved C# keyword. And with that in place, our first element is done. So you can see these helpers are pretty lightweight and keep you close to the HTML to give you a good amount of control. For the most part, this is how we go about creating all the other elements for this form, with minor differences. In the interest of time, I'm just going to paste in the rest of them so that we can focus on the ones that are a bit different. The most interesting is probably the drop-down list for helper, which can be a bit confusing at first. This helper also has a few different overloads, but the important idea is that it expects a list of the class select list item. Each object of this class represents a choice in a drop-down, which is why we have both a display text property and a value property. We can then pass in that list, and the drop-down helper will generate appropriate HTML for us with the right select options and such. We'll look at how to make this list pull from the database later on. A couple other things to note, there's also an html.textArea4 helper method, and we can pass in the rows for that on an attribute object as well. So that finishes building the HTML for our form through these Razor helpers. Let's just run our application quick and make sure that we get the results we're expecting. When the page loads, it should look identical to how it did before, except now these elements are generated by our Razor helpers. If we right-click inside of one of these text boxes and choose to inspect the element, we can see another interesting change inside the HTML. Notice how our elements are named according to our C# object properties. This means that when we submit the form, the posted values will be named properly to work with model binding, so things should come together really nicely. Let's look more closely at that process in the next lesson, where we'll walk through how to handle form submissions.